Hi readers, Chris here. Today is my Better Late Than Never April wrap-up and May TBR. Before I jump in, of course, I have to say Happy Mother's Day to all my fellow mothers, stepmothers, grandmothers, aunts, pet mothers, plant mothers, whatever type of mother you are or mother you have in your life. Hope you have a wonderful day. I debated whether or not I wanted to post this video because I am seriously behind in my reviews, but that's okay. I'm gonna dive right in. I actually had a pretty good reading month in April. I actually finished 8 books, which I think is like a record for me. Now, to be fair, if you saw my wrap up from last month, Stephen King's The Tommyknockers, technically I read most of that book in March, but because I didn't actually finish it in March, I didn't count it, so I'm counting it for April. All of these books I finished in April, 8 books, record for me. I'm going to go through them from my least favorite to my favorite, starting with number 8, my least favorite read of April, which I'm sorry to say is going to be Prince of Thorns by Mark Lawrence. Now, I'm not going to say a lot about this book because I do have a full-length review coming out soon. I actually buddy read this book with one of my fellow booktubers, David. David's book reviews, I will link him down below. David and I are going to be talking more about this book in the very near future, so I'm not going to say anything about it other than it's my least favorite book of the month. You'll have to watch some other videos to find out why. Next up, my next least favorite book of April is actually going to be The Tommyknockers by Stephen King. Now, I didn't hate this book. I actually didn't hate Prince of Thorns either. I just didn't like Prince of Thorns, and I don't even know how to say if I'm on the fence about The Tommyknockers. Like, I don't love it. I don't hate it. I'm just kind of meh in the middle. So because I don't have a strong feeling either way, that's why this book is so low on my list. I already did like a 1-minute review for it, but basically I felt like this book was way too long, as a lot of Stephen King books tend to be. Way too long, there's too many characters, there's too many like random side things that don't really mean anything. I thought the story was a little bit all over the place, and yeah, that is why not one of my favorite reads of the month, that's for sure. My 6th favorite book of April is going to be Battle of the Labyrinth. This is the 4th book in the Percy Jackson series, and I did like this book. I did like it. But the reason it's so far down on my list is that I do feel that as the series has gone on, so this is the 4th book now, I do feel that they have a bit of a sameness to them, a bit of a sameness. Well, I mean, not all of them do, but this one felt very similar to like the first book, which I really liked, but it just didn't have enough, it didn't have enough exciting things in it to put it higher on my list. It's not to say I didn't like it. I definitely still did like it. And eventually I'm going to review the whole thing, but I don't even think I've reviewed book 3 yet. So yeah, I'm a little behind on reviews, but even though this book is farther down on my list because it's not as new and exciting as some of the other ones, I still enjoyed it. I still think it's a solid book in this series, which is turning out to be really, really great. I just had some other books that I liked more this month because I read so many. My 5th favorite book of April was Our Crooked Hearts by Melissa Albert. If you recall, this book was actually sent to me by Flatiron Books. This book does not come out until June, so this is an advanced reader copy. I was really looking forward to this one and really hoping that I loved it because I want free books. And I did enjoy this book. It has a lot of good things going for it, but if I'm being honest, it was not perfect. So the basic premise here is that we have a young girl who is discovering that there's something weird going on with her mom. And then her mother, we have a lot of flashbacks to when her mother was a young girl, and we see her getting involved in all this witchcraft type stuff. So there's basically like 2 timelines in this book. The daughter's present timeline and then the mother's past timeline. And I thought that there was too much of the mother's past timeline and not enough of the present, because it feels like this book is supposed to be about the daughter. It's supposed to be about her discovering her mother and discovering her history and her heritage and her power. but I felt the book focused way too much on the mother. It honestly feels like this is the mother's story and not the daughter's. And I get that it can be both, but I just felt like it was a little bit uneven. Still enjoyed it, still has a lot of good things going for it, still has a lot of potential, but that would be my one piece of feedback. Not that Flatiron's watching all of my videos, but if for some reason they are, my one piece of feedback would be edit out some of those flashbacks a little bit so that we can really focus on the daughter's journey. So this brings me to my top 4, that's 8, my top 4 favorite books of April, starting with the other Stephen King book that I read in April, The Dark Half. Now, this was a Stephen King book that I pretty much had no idea what it was about going in. I just knew that it was next on the list, so I picked it up and started reading it. This is a really cool book, At least I think so. This book is basically about an author who writes under a pseudonym. So you think of Stephen King wrote under the name Richard Bachman for years. But in this story, the pseudonym, the false identity, actually comes to life, takes on its own living persona, and starts going around killing people. And yes, why that sounds ridiculous when you first hear it, but I swear to God, it works. In this book, it totally works. I like books that work on like multiple levels. And I feel like this book works on multiple levels. Like everyone has a dark side, a dark half. I thought that came out really, really cool here. People that write under pseudonyms, like that's a whole thing. The way that you control your darker half or don't control it. I think this book has so much going for it. Will be a review eventually whenever I get to it. And it also has like a ton of like really creepy, gruesome parts too. All the things that you love Stephen King for. Great characters that are deep and complex, great, creepy, scary scenes. I love this book. I really enjoyed it. So why is it only 4? The competition was just really hard in April. It was just really hard. I think this book probably isn't for everyone. I just personally loved it. And that brings me to book number 3, which is another book that I know is not going to be for everyone, but I absolutely loved it, and that is Crave by Tracy Wolff. If you've never heard of Crave, this is basically an updated version of Twilight. We have a young girl, her name is Grace. Her parents die in a car crash and she has to go live with her only remaining family. Her uncle runs this academy that's out in the middle of nowhere in Alaska, Katmere Academy. But when she gets there, she finds out that there's all this weird stuff going around in the school. People are trying to kill her. And then she meets this super hot guy named Jackson. And of course, he's got his own things going on with him. I don't want to ruin it if you are interested in it. But this book is Twilight, if you catch my drift. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's Twilight. Where we have a young girl who's totally obsessed with a creature that she probably shouldn't be. But the thing about this book, which makes me like it better than Twilight, is that this book does not take itself seriously. Like Twilight, at times, Bella takes herself very seriously. She's like a serious character. She doesn't have a lot of humor. Grace, the main character in here, the character whose head we're in, is absolutely hilarious. This book knows that it is ridiculous. This book knows that it is corny, but it leans into it. Like, it leans into it hard. So if you are looking for a book that you don't have to think hard about, that you can laugh at, that you can make fun of, and that if you like stuff that's corny or ridiculous, this is the book for you. This book had me laughing out loud so many times. I just found it really enjoyable, really funny. My inner 12-year-old schoolgirl absolutely loved this book. I'm definitely going to pick up the second one whenever I get a chance. The only reason it's not higher up is the ending I wasn't a big fan of. It does end on a cliffhanger, and I'm not a big fan of cliffhangers, so that's the only reason it's not 1 or 2, but I still really enjoyed this book. Book number 1 and book number 2, I had a really difficult time deciding between because I both love these books a lot. I love them both a lot. But at the end of the day, I had to choose one. So book number 2 for April is going to be A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. I just did a 1-minute review for this book last week, and I just loved this book. I had a really good time because there is a twist that happens early on in the book that makes you realize that the character whose POV you're getting, the narrator of the story, we don't know if she's telling the truth or not. We don't know if she's hallucinating. We don't know if she's crazy. We don't know if things are actually happening to her or if she just thinks they're happening to her. We have no idea. And it was so much fun throughout the book trying to figure out, like, how crazy is she? At times reading this book, I felt like I was going crazy because I could not figure out what was going on. And I had some suspicions, but I had no idea that things would turn out the way they did. This book has a great, shocking ending, and I just loved it. I thought, again, another book that was so much fun to read. All these books, so much fun. They're just so much fun. So if you like unreliable narrators and witchcraft that may or may not actually be witchcraft, and murder mysteries and psychological thrillers, A Lesson in Vengeance, dark academia thrown in there. I mean, there's a little bit of everything in this book. Super fun, super cool. Definitely recommend it. So that brings me to my number 1 favorite book of April, a book that I have not gotten around to reviewing yet. Actually, I haven't really reviewed any of these books except for A Lesson in Vengeance, and that is going to be The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. This is the 3rd and final book in his Mistborn series, and by far, this is my favorite book of the Mistborn series, my absolute favorite book. Back when I read the first Mistborn, it's called Mistborn here in the US, I think it's called Final Empire other places, but when I read the first one, like, the first half of the book was like really slow, and then all of a sudden, like at the end, there's this big twist and it gets really exciting. And then there was book 2, The Well of Ascension, and it was the same thing. The first half of the book was really slow, and then the second half of the book, there's a big twist and all this exciting stuff happens. Going into the third one, I expected the same thing. I expected the first half of the book to be slow and then the second half to be exciting. But that is not what happened. I actually found this entire book exciting. I found this entire book exciting because I think one of the reasons that helped, or one of the things that helped this one, is that we have a lot of POVs from different characters that we never saw before in the previous books. So we have characters like there's this guy Spook, who was like a really minimal character in book 1, like a little bit of a bigger character in book 2, and then all of a sudden we're following his story and you're like, why are we following Spook? What does he have to do with anything? And it turns out to be super cool. And then there's this creature called the Khandra, and the Khandra, we've never had a POV from their perspective, and that was really cool. There's all these different creatures in this world, and you get to learn different things about them that you never had before. And as someone who absolutely loves world building and loves hearing how things work and how different creatures have their own government, there is just so much good stuff in here. Not to mention, there's not 1 or 2, there is like multiple twists and multiple bombshells throughout this book that just had me gasping out loud going, oh my god, that's crazy. And I have never read, well, I shouldn't say never, but it has been a long time since I've read a more satisfying ending to like an epic fantasy than I did here. It is really hard to wrap up a big epic fantasy series. It is really difficult. And I think that Brandon Sanderson did it absolutely great here. Absolutely beautifully. So for those reasons, The Hero of Ages is on the top of my list for April. So now that we got through those 8 freaking books, I'm going to quickly share with you what I'm going to be reading for May 2022. First up is my reader recommendation for May, and that is going to be The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This book was recommended to me by one of my followers over on Instagram, Nika Cole. I have heard so many good things about this series. I heard it's great if you like fantasy and fairy tales. Only a couple chapters in, so I don't really have a strong opinion of the book yet, but it seems fun so far, so we'll see what happens. Next up, I'm continuing my Stephen King journey with his next published book, 4 Past Midnight. Now, this is a collection of novellas. I think the most well-known in here is The Secret Garden, which some of you may or may not remember. There was a movie based on it a few years back with Johnny Depp. But 4 Past Midnight, this is a chunky book, so we'll see if I actually get the whole thing finished in May. Next up, I have my adult fantasy for May, and I decided to go back to a series that I started last summer, which is going to be the Davabad series. The first book that I read was City of Brass, and the second one is Kingdom of Copper. I bought this book last year, like as soon as I finished the first one, but then I got distracted by other stuff because, you know, it happens. So going back to the series and hoping that I can actually finish this one out before the end of the year. Next up, I have my random book, which is sometimes romance, sometimes historical fiction. This month I picked Anthem by Noah Hawley. I've been interested in this book ever since it came out in the beginning of the year. I am mostly familiar with Noah Hawley from his work on television. If you're not familiar with him, he is responsible for the Fargo series on FX. He also did Legion. So he's known for being very weird, I guess, for lack of a better term. And this book is supposed to be like kind of fantasy, but it also takes place like in modern day, so right after the pandemic. I have a feeling it's either going to be super pretentious, super weird, or a little bit of both. And having gotten, just a few chapters in, I'm already thinking it's definitely both. It's definitely pretentious and it's definitely weird, but I'm hoping that I'll still like it anyway. Next up, I have my YA fantasy for the month, and I have to shout out Mary and Joe over at BookBuzz. I've had this book on my TBR for so long. I've been wanting to read it. They finally convinced me to read it because of their recent review of this book, and that is The House in the Cerulean Sea. I'm going to link their video down below. I don't think I have ever heard one person say one bad thing about this book, ever. So my expectations are super high, which scares me because sometimes when my expectations get too high, like, it just can't live up. But I'm a little bit in so far, really liking it, but we'll see how it goes. Next up, I'm continuing my Percy Jackson series with the last book in this series, and that's going to be Percy Jackson, The Last Olympian. Yes, this is the 5th and final book in the original Percy Jackson series, and yeah, I'm hoping that this series ends with a bang. There's been a lot of setup, there's been a lot of stuff going on in the background that's finally coming to a head. There's supposed to be a big battle. Percy's got to make a lot of choices. There's prophecies. There's a lot of stuff going on, so I'm curious to see how this series wraps up and if it can end on a high note. And finally, my last book for May is going to be another book box book, and I had to pick this one, just had to pick this one, which is the one I most recently got from my Owl Crate book box, and that is Hotel Magnifique. Some of you may remember I picked this book as like one of my most anticipated releases for April, back when I did that video. And when I found out that it came in my Owl Crate book box, I was so excited because that doesn't usually happen. Like, I see a book and I'm like, oh, it's so interested, and then it ends up on my doorstep. This one just sounded really fun. So again, I hope it lives up to my expectations. We'll see what happens. That is it for my April wrap up and my May TBR. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not already, please subscribe to my channel for more bookish videos, reviews coming your way soon. All right, everyone, happy reading.